like, if anybody on this, listening to this is looking at franchising, you want to make sure you're going into a system too that is not going to overdevelop and infringe on you because, they're salivating on royalties and, hey, let's just get as many doors open as we can. And let's get franchise fees in. That's not, you want to go with a system that is married to the partnership. It's all about longevity, long-term, and they truly want you to be successful, and they want unit level economics, have to be there. Like, that's number one. If owners aren't making money and it's not a healthy system, run for the hills. So that's the first thing. The second thing would be quality of population, meaning what is the average household income? So for us, we're typically looking at, like, somewhere in the realm, I would say a national average of maybe 55,000 average household, which in New York might be 85, 90, or San Francisco could be 90, 100, if you're looking at like Tiburon or an area in San Francisco that's really high net worth. So that's what we look at. And then again, third, retail piggybacking, so on and so forth. Super important for us. I think that if you are starting your own, I think it's great to understand what the competitive landscape looks like. Like, who is out there? What is your business? Are there competitors that are actually going to these shows? Kind of interesting. When I first started back with You Break, I Fix, I got really aggressive about shows. I also love travel. I've flown a lot. I told you about my background. And clearly my old man loves to travel. So for me, getting on a plane and going to a random city and putting up a booth and like talking to people, like, that's what I've done my whole life. So I started going to shows. And at the time I realized, like, up until now, still our major competitor, they don't go to shows at all.
Wow.
So I was like, well, this is a huge advantage. And we've probably sold, between me and my team, I don't know, 30, 40 locations over the last 7 years from going to shows, that if we just said, hey, we're not going to go to them, like, we would have been missing out. Now, does it take work? Is it uncomfortable? Are you away from your family? Do you have to stay in a random hotel? Yeah. But, if you're cool with doing that, do it. It was an interesting one, actually. So I have probably a pretty different upbringing. My dad was a presenter, speaker. So he traveled around a lot. I think he's got about 11 or 12 million miles. I think he has 6 million on Delta. So my dad was super entrepreneurial, did travel a lot, had a lot of different businesses, super, super hardworking. I grew up in a family where if you had downtime, you weren't playing video games, you were mowing the yard, you were cleaning the gutters, you were, doing something. Every year, my dad would order somewhere between like 15 and 20 tons of cypress mulch, I think, just to see me and my brothers move it and spread it, around the yard. So that was my upbringing. We had fun. Of course, we had time to be kids and all that stuff, but it was normally when my dad was out of town.
Interesting.
When he got back to town, it was work. And I know you have a real estate background as well. My family is heavily into real estate, and we always make the joke that that my dad had kids for the support and the labor for properties and different businesses that he had. So that's definitely great. A different upbringing, but two brothers, and dinner was always super comedic and a lot of fun. So
very cool. Very cool. What types of things did he present on? Was he like I guess you could say like a business coach, or was it more like working for a company where he'd fly around and do different presentations like that?
Yeah. So going back to the 1980s, there's a gentleman by the name of Chuck Givens. You might know Charles Givens, who is very, very well known. He built a company out of Orlando, and at the time, he was before Russ Whitney. If you've heard of Russ Whitney, Russ Whitney was another. There's also another guy that is out of Orlando named Larry Pino that built a company called Dynatech that was pretty successful. But Charles Givens, Chuck Givens, he was kind of the big player at the time. And my dad had some friends that that worked for Chuck, and I think they were looking for people that had real estate experience from an investor standpoint, and they were looking for people that could present and help others,
I
take
see.
that step.
Yep.
And my dad was recruited, I think, and my dad's very charismatic. He's incredible at presenting in front of groups, specifically large groups, and that's something he just did really well at, exceeded at. And
Yeah.
I think he worked with Chuck for a long time, and then segued to a few other companies. And in the early 2000s, he ended up starting his own company that was very successful for a long time. But yeah, he spoke to about 1.5 million people on real
Wow.
estate investing for probably, I don't know, 15 to 20 years. If you ever went
Wow.
to a Learning Annex event, which is Bill Zanker, Trump, and a lot of those, Tony Robbins, a lot of those big names. And then he worked with Peter Lowe. If you're familiar with him and Get Motivated seminars, he was one of their probably most consistent presenters. I think he was on stage with Peter for about 15 to 20
Wow.
years.
That's cool. That's
So
very
yeah,
cool.
it's just different upbringing with some of that experience. I mean, growing up, getting to meet Zig Ziglar and Brian Tracy and
Hmm.
T. Harv Eker and Tony Robbins and all these people all the time was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's really, really amazing. So you have that obviously shaped you. It gave you a foundation, right? And we'll get into what you're doing today, but
Sure.
what do you think? How do you think that really impacted you? How do you think that, like, did that give you like advantages? Because I mean, you obviously were meeting these people. Were you necessarily consuming any of their content, or going and seeking their advice on anything? Were you sort of able to tap into some of the things that they were talking about at all?
Yeah, I was, and at the age, I didn't grow up in the environment or the household where we didn't have an allowance.
Hmm.
It was kind of like your allowance is you get fed and
Yeah,
you get the
yeah.
new baseball glove, if for school, or you get books or the new book bag or whatever, which by the way is great. But when I was in my teens, I guess what I'm getting at, I was meeting a lot of these people, seeing my dad, take the stage with Rudy Giuliani and talking to them in the green room and getting to meet, George Foreman, like all these people was really cool. Like it was
Hmm.
valuable. But at the time, I guess the short answer is I wish I was older when I met them,
Yeah.
because I would have been able to ask them better questions and I would be able to connect more, on their level. But I do think that the information that I learned, surprisingly, a lot of it you do remember, or you're in a work you're in a work environment, and you remember something that you heard, or you take something from a leadership perspective and you're able to apply it. So a lot of that sunk in. But I do think it's important for people to, and I'm talking to myself, to continue to go back and listen, to
Hmm.
read books and listen to information, podcasts, audiobooks, whatever, however you learn. Some people listen better than they read, and that's okay. Or taking seminars and going to different trainings. And even if you've done it before, I find going back, it kind of lights a new fire. And I think that's the one thing that I miss the most. I used to get really inspired going to all these seminars and meeting
Yeah.
these people. There's this euphoric high that you get,
Sure.
that you're learning content and you're hearing new things, and you have these new ideas, and there's like this fire that's under your chair, and you just feel like anything's possible. And then you get back into the real world, and you realize that it's just good to, I think, surround yourself around that group of people. And I think that's the one thing I miss the most,
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
just being constantly in that environment, which I was, because prior to working where I am now, I did a few different things. But I worked in that industry for a while, and it was just a lot of fun. I mean, there are cons to it, but
Yeah.
the pros is just getting to be around that, and the inspiration that you have day in and day out is
Yeah.
just awesome.
And
So
and that's something that obviously everybody struggles with, I guess. They go to these conferences and that, like you said, they're on this high, and then maybe it lasts a week, and then it's back to the back to the
Sure.
same old grindstone. Did you ever find any tips or techniques or anything like that to, sort of propel that forward a little bit more? Was it actually, just making sure that you get out and start implementing whatever it was that you were excited about, whatever it was that you learned as quickly as possible so that, you could start seeing the results and say like, yeah, it does actually work, and let that feed you? Or is it any thoughts on that, like how to cope with that, that high, and then, stopping that from coming crashing down so quickly? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think what I found, like the people that go to the seminars that are most successful, whether it's a real estate seminar and you're learning to invest in mobile home parks or storage facilities or billboards, or you're going to a tax lien course or an options course or crypto or
Mhm.
like whatever it is, I feel like a lot of people go to those trainings and they're going, hey, I want to supplement. I'm gonna continue to be a nurse or a doctor or do whatever I'm doing, but I'm
Yeah.
just looking for that additional revenue stream. And I think a lot of people go to courses like that thinking that they just want an additional 5, 10, 15K a month in revenue, whatever it is that they want. And then they realize after going to the course, oh, holy cow, like this is a lot, like it's almost like a full-time job. I'm not sure how I can do it. And then
Mhm.
they take the path of least resistance. Like they went in thinking they wanted to do X, and then they left going, okay, well, I'll just do some options trading, or I'll just learn something else maybe that's easier, where I don't have to put as much time in. I feel like the most successful people that I met, that went through programs, and I mean, we saw hundreds of thousands of people over the course of the time that me and my brothers and my father did what we did. um, they were the people that had a burning desire,
Mhm.
where it wasn't is this going to work, does it work? It was, there's no choice, like
Yeah.
this is going to work and I'm going to make it work, and I'm going to take what I learned, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to implement it, be successful. But anytime where you just jump, and I guess that old adage, you jump off the building and you learn how to fly on the way down. I think the
Mhm.
benefit of getting training and support and having mentors, or which doesn't necessarily mean you go to a Tony Robbins course and then you get a mentor, or you take some real estate training or something. It could just be somebody in your community, or somebody
Mhm.
is taking you, or a family figure, somebody that's been super successful. Having that mentor give you guidance, the flight on the way down is going to be much more pleasant,
Yeah. Yeah.
as opposed to just straight down.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And something along those lines that I learned myself the hard way growing up is you always want to make sure that whoever it is that you're taking that advice, taking that guidance from, actually has what it is that you are looking for, right? So a lot of
Yeah, it's
people,
true.
a lot of people will, make it seem like they've got this, life of Riley, they've got everything all figured out and all of that. But when you pull back the curtain, it might not be that way, right? So I unfortunately went down a path of, I chose a mentor that, I was taking their advice in that. Then I realized at one point that they were basically, first thing that they would do is get up in the morning and go and, dial the bank to check on their bank account, because they were basically living paycheck to paycheck. I'm like, well, that's not what I want, right? So
Yeah,
you want to make sure that you're taking advice from somebody who actually does have, and it's difficult to be able to
sure.
vet that, right? It's difficult to be able to find
It
those people
is.
that truly do have that.
It
But
is. And I will say that I think you bring up a really good point. I think some of the best advice, and this I would say one thing that I took away from a lot of those inspirational people that I grew up around, and I got the opportunity to meet at a young age. One of the things that I took away is I've always tried to surround myself with people that are uplifting, inspiring, and people that are doing better, or bigger than I am,
mhm,
or more successful than I am. And success doesn't necessarily always mean financial success. Like at the end of the day, I don't want to follow somebody to success and
yeah,
they're a horrible human being that doesn't
yeah,
do anything for their community, but they're wealthy. Because at the end of the day, money doesn't buy happiness.
exactly,
If you're a
exactly.
miserable person and you got money, you're a miserable rich person who
Right, right.
ultimately is a fill in the blank, right?
Yep,
And
yep.
nobody wants to be that person. So that's something that I think I learned, that I did. And I think it's something that people should do. And I know it's kind of cliche and it's like, oh, surround yourself with people that also the moment, like, if you're in a corporate gig or, you're looking to do something, step out of your comfort zone or start a business or start a podcast or whatever it is, you ultimately get people, that maybe are comfortable with working with you at corporate, or they're wanting you to kind of, they want that status quo, and they're the ones that ultimately right out of the gate, they're like, hey, well, what if you fail? 2 out of 3 businesses fail, and that's garbage. You got to surround yourself with people that, are going to support you and say, hey, it is going to be tough, but I know this is your dream and I know this is what you want to do, and I'm behind you. You can do it. And by the way, I know some people that can help. Here's some people that I know that you might not know that could, maybe give you some guidance and support. So that's one thing that's really helped me, because, sometimes times are tough. And if you don't have a good group around you that's encouraging you, starting with your spouse, that's a problem.
Right. Yeah. So, it's so easy to get sucked down into the negativity of things. So, but no, completely agree. Having a positive outlook on everything, no matter how bad it is, is always the best way to be able to approach things. So love it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And one other thing to say there too, before I forget, I think that, and I'm not knocking the industry that, my father cut his teeth in, and actually he still speaks, which is crazy. He's a madman. But the industry in general, you have a lot of people that speak about it, but that don't do it. And I think, one of the things that, I was proud of, a lot of the people that we worked with did what they talked about. But that's always been a challenging thing. And the industry is full of people that are talking about options trading or talking about, whatever they're selling, and they ultimately don't do it. And that was one of the reasons why I ended up moving on from that industry in general, is I wanted to, move on to something else and just, try something totally different. And that's what landed me in the franchising space.
Yeah, love it. Which brings us to where we are today, right? So you were, I believe you said, employee number 12 at iBreak Is that right?
At Break, I Fix, yeah. And I think it was 12 or 13, somewhere around there. And it was interesting how I came across Break, I Fix. My wife is awesome. She ultimately introduced me to the founder and CEO of Break, I Fix. He's no longer the CEO, but the founder, and he's still an advisor, still on with the company. His name is Justin Wetherill. Definitely anybody listening, Google him if there's videos or content on him, or the guy's incredible. But Justin, UCF student out of Orlando, Florida, was working at a UCF so he graduated UCF, I want to say 06, 07, and was working for a consulting firm called Hewitt, which I think Aon Hewitt, I think, is a huge company. Finance degree, finance background. He broke his phone, bumped into some gal in Orlando, broke his phone. It was an iPhone 3G throwback, right?
Yeah.
He went online to try to figure out how to repair it, ordered some parts off eBay. He tore his phone up even more, was bound to figure out how to fix the dang thing, ordered more parts, ended up, fixing his phone. People knew about it, heard about it, that were friends of his, coworkers, people we went to school with. Oh, I broke mine too, and there's really nobody in town. Can you help me? And he started fixing people's phones at the Panera Bread over off University Boulevard in Orlando. And you'd meet people at lunch break, would meet them, pick up their phone. He would do some of the work, but he actually had it's actually a good friend of mine, Carlos Marmo, was his first employee, who was his roommate. So he'd take the phones back. Carlos, would fix them. And they started marketing, basically brought on another partner, David Reif, who was a mechanical engineer who just graduated, was working at Lockheed Martin in Orlando as well. David put together an eBay listing, where they started, getting 8 to 10 different, phones being mailed to them a week. And Carlos, Justin's roommate, literally just had a tent in the middle of the living room and was knocking out repairs during the day. Justin would come home from work. That was the birth of Break, I Fix in 2008. And then we opened the first retail store in 2009 in Orlando. From 2009 to 2013, 47 corporate retail owned by the three guys, Justin, David, and Eddie, three different guys, were opened mainly throughout Florida. And there were a few outside of the state. And that was all pre-franchising. So I met Justin, I guess where I come in and where, to give you that timeline. I met my wife back in 2012. When I met her, she talked about her best friend, Jenny. Jenny's awesome. And Jenny married Justin, the founder of You Break, I Fix. So they grew up together. So I got to know Justin, and just such a cool guy. First time I met him, he's the guy like at the high school lunch table that, the jocks, the thespians, everybody wants to sit and hang with Justin. He's just that guy. Everybody likes him.
Yeah.
And when I first met him, I was like, there's something, special about this guy. And I was looking to buy some franchises in Orlando. I wanted to start something, ideally buy something existing, because I think franchising is really cool. And I think it gives people a huge hand up, and it helps people get where they want to go a lot faster, typically, because there's a recipe or a playbook in place. So I wanted to buy something in Orlando, and then I met Justin, and I was like, wow, do you have any opportunities in Orlando? And he's like, yeah, we do. And I was actually going to franchise with him and do maybe 2 or 3 locations in Orlando. I really believed in him and the concept. I love service-based businesses in general. And he's super convincing. And he just said, hey man, why don't you not do that? Why don't you come work for me instead? And here I am. So like literally over 7 years later, I'm still here. But I came on board with You Break, I Fix when we had about, I want to say we had 58, 60 locations. We had just started franchising.
Okay.
And, I hired a team, and we've grown a lot over the years. Now I think we've got 730 doors open, and we've sold another 500 in addition to those 700. So it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun. One of my brothers, it's not his full-time thing, but he's got franchises in the Panhandle and also in Georgia. My mom was a franchisee for 4 years. She sold and is now retired. So it's a family affair. I've got family that still own franchises today. So
it's
really
been
fun.
Cool. That is really, really cool. So they already had the franchising package put together when you came on board, right?
They did. And one of the things that Justin did, I give him huge credit for this. So Justin, going back to the mentor conversation that we had, Justin's, I believe, uncle, I think it's his uncle, is a very well-known high-level attorney out in California that I think is an IP patent attorney, I believe. Okay. So when Justin was looking to franchise this, he didn't just go on LegalZoom. And by the way, I'm not throwing shade at LegalZoom. I think LegalZoom is great for a lot of different needs. But when you've got 47 retail stores and you're trying to, start a franchise, you don't go for the free template, Google, free franchise disclosure documents, right? If you're trying to put together a syndication for real estate, you probably shouldn't just Google private placement offering and pick the first one you see. You should probably hire an attorney and get the best that you can find, regardless if you can't afford them, figure that out, figure out how you can, sell plasma or, partner, whatever you need to do it right. And he did. He brought on an attorney who's really reputable, who's very well known in franchising. They spent a lot of money on it. And they got an FDD done really, really well in 2013. So when I came on board, there was an FDD, a disclosure document in place. That the FTC does regulate franchising and oversees, the space. And what I was able to help do was, to more so, and this isn't to take anything away from them. They were doing a great job prior to me. But what I was able to do is really focus on sales in general, which gave Eddie Trujillo, who was doing, my role prior, the ability to focus on what he does best, which is operations. And, I helped put a formal discovery day in place, put a kind of funny, one of the things, and hopefully I'm not getting off in left field, but
no.
When I came on board, I learned the first day that the gentleman that I replaced was emailing prospects, but he was not calling them.
Okay.
So it's crazy what you do when you
Yeah.
actually pick up the phone. So what I immediately started doing was not only sending an email and saying, thank you for responding, inquiring about you break, I fixed, the email, kind of a
Yeah.
template. But I was picking up the phone and I was actually saying, hey, this, is Brynson Smith with You Break, I Fix. And, I saw you reached out about franchise opportunities and, I'd love to learn a little more about you and see if it's a fit and discuss geography. It's crazy what happens when
Yeah.
you do that and you get personal and you talk to people. So I was able to, I think, help put more of that process in and put discovery days and hire a sales team, grow a sales team, and manage that process. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. That's amazing. So do you guys go through, like you said, the geographic locations and all of that? Obviously, the areas have to qualify, to be able to support a franchise, right? I mean, you have to be so far away from other ones. And, are there any other variables that you look at, when you're, and I guess this is kind of like an open-ended question, maybe not
Sure.
necessarily focused in on I break, you fix, but when you're looking for a franchise location, I've never really looked into franchising before, but if you're
Sure.
looking for a franchise location, is there certain things that you want to be able to sort of check off that you want to know what the traffic counts are, you want to know if there's other competition around you, whatever that is, or like what we do in real estate is we look for specific benchmarks in the area. Is there a Chick-fil-A around, is there a Target around, or
Yeah.
is it like
Smart.
yeah, are there other things like like the off-branded cellular places where maybe that's an area you don't want to go in? So are there
Yeah.
similar things that you guys do as well to sort of qualify an area before you would say, yeah, this is the best option for us in that general area?
Yeah, and I think you're spot on with what you said. I think that what we call it in the franchising space, and it's probably in the real estate world in general called this, but we call it retail piggybacking,
Okay.
where we
Yeah.
look at retailers that are that are existing that will either sell a device that we will repair or support or some, like, to give you an example, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint, I guess, T-Mo Sprint, I guess is the
Hmm.
same one now.
Hmm.
Best Buy, Fry's Electronics. I'm dating myself now with, Circuit City.
Yeah.
Some of those brands that sell or activate devices in the market that we repair, we want to be in a market where they are. And if we're looking at a market, right, take I don't know why I'm pulling this one up, but take Tupelo, Mississippi as an example. If you do,
Mhm.
some research on Tupelo, Mississippi, and there isn't a Verizon there, we're probably going to scratch our head and go, huh, is there an AT&T? Well, there's no AT&T. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Is there a Sprint, a T-Mobile? Okay, well, there's one. Well, that's strange. Is there a Best Buy? No, there's not. And then we start looking at other retailers. There, Target's not there, but Walmart is. Home Depot's there, but Lowe's isn't. And you start to, for us, we would probably err on the side of caution in a scenario like that. And I don't also want to paint the picture that our whole focus are other franchisors, which is what we are. We're a franchisor. Our focus is just retail piggybacking. We also look at two other things that we look at a high level that are really important. One is population density. We look for typically 100,000 people in a market, which in an urban market, which would be like a New York City or San Francisco or like a downtown Miami or Philadelphia, Houston, those would be, you'd find 100,000 people in probably a mile,
Yeah.
maybe a mile and a half, could be even a half a mile. And you don't really look at it as a radius in New York because it's more of a grid,
Yeah.
which is kind of weird because in other areas that become more suburban and rural, we do look more at a radius, but in urban markets, you have to look at it a little differently, I think. So for us, we give our owners, we're looking for about 100,000 people, for a store to be, successful. So to go back to like the Tupelo example, let's say Tupelo at 100,000 people, we wouldn't do two stores in Tupelo because at the end of the day, any healthy system, and this is, I think, good. Like if anybody on this, listening to this is looking at franchising, you want to make sure you're going into a system too that is not going to overdevelop
Mhm.
and infringe on you because, they're salivating on royalties and, hey, let's just get as many doors open as we can, and let's get franchise fees in. That's not, you want to go with a system that is married to the partnership. It's all about longevity, long term, and they truly want you to be successful, and they want unit level economics, have to be there. Like, that's number one. If owners aren't making money and it's not a healthy system, run for the hills. So that's the first thing. The second thing would be quality of population, meaning what is the average household income? So for us, we're typically looking at, like, somewhere in the realm, I would say a national average of maybe 55,000 average household, which in New York might be 85, 90, or San Francisco could be 90, 100, if you're looking at like Tiburon or an area in San Francisco that's really high net worth. So that's what we look at. And then again, third, retail piggybacking, so on and so forth. Super important for us.
And if someone was interested in, creating I break, you fix. No, yes, I break, you fix. I keep getting that backwards.
It's all good, man. It's you break, I fix. But
you break, I fix. I got it.
When I first heard it, I said I break, you fix too. So no worries there.
Got it. So if someone was interested in creating a franchise, do you help them choose a location? Is it, does it have to be, within so many miles of wherever they are located at, so they can kind of help? Or is it, something that they just say, hey, I want to create a franchise. You guys have the playbook, and, help me find a place. Like, how does that process work?
Yeah, good question. So most franchisors that are sophisticated, that are larger, or going about it the right way, have already looked at the landscape domestically. As an example, they've looked at the entire country, and they've said, hey, based on these economic indicator, based on these indicators that I mentioned earlier, and maybe a few other ones depending on their business model, where, what markets do we want to be in? Now, as you get more granular on a market like a Seattle, Washington, and you're looking at that market, okay, well, is Seattle viable? Yes, it is, for sure. Well, how many stores can we fit in Seattle based on the population, based on the incomes, and based on the retailers, that we have? So that's another thing that we try to do. So, you take a market like, Orlando, Florida, where you have 2.5 million people. Simple math would tell you off the top of my head, and I'm not great at math, but I think that would say that 25 stores, 2.5 million people, 25 stores could fit in Orlando, as an example. Well, when you start looking at the average household income, we want to be in markets where you would find a Jimmy John's, a Starbucks, a Chipotle, a Zaxby's, a Best Buy, so on and so forth. When you look at some of those markets in Orlando, they're heavy with, check cashing, pawn shops. You get into those markets where they're lower income, and there's nothing wrong with those markets. We just want to make sure that the customer can afford to spend the money, the discretionary, they have that discretionary income to spend on our service. So, you look at Orlando as an example, you'd probably take 10 off, because 10 stores that, you cross-reference the incomes, and you're like, we're probably somewhere in the 10 to 15, 10 to 16 stores in a market, with 2.5 minutes. So that's what we would do. And then we'd say, okay, and sorry for jumping around, but to go back to Orlando, let's say we have 15, and that's what we say, we want to sell, or we want to award to, prospective franchisees. The next step would be, okay, well, do we want to sell this to one person, or do we want to sell it to multiple? Well, when you look at one person that would take 15 stores, well, how long would it take them to get 15 open? That could take them 5-6 years. And most franchises don't want to tie up that geography that long with one prospect that, by the way, might or might not be proven, may or may not be proven yet, because maybe they don't have franchising experience, but they have a ton of capital. So that would be a high risk scenario. So what we would do in a scenario like that is we'd say, hey, look, Mr. or Miss Franchisee, you're a newer franchisee, you have the capital to do 10, 15. Why don't you start with 5, or why don't you start with 3? And then let's move forward. And if there's opportunity to do more later and you want to do more, we'd love to give you that. But we don't want to, we never want to put too much on somebody's plate if we know upfront that it's too much, because we're setting them up for failure, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. And so you guys would have already pre-qualified an area. So do you basically give them, here's your block, find a location, that is in that block somewhere? Or do you guys actually physically say, okay, this is your location, this is where you're going to go?
Yeah, so we try to have a really good collaboration between the franchisor to franchisee relationship. At our company, there are a lot of large companies that and again, not throwing rocks at anybody, but like I imagine McDonald's is probably more so like this is where we're going to go, and I think this McDonald's business is real estate, like that is their core business. So I imagine they lead more so with like, here's where we're going, who is the right fit. And it's more of, that kind of conversation where, with us, we're going into 800 to 1200 square foot strip centers. Typically like, that plaza road visibility, where all the major retailers are. And, it's a pretty quick build out, but we're relying a lot on the franchisee to give us feedback, but we're also looking at the markets as well. Our real estate team is super sophisticated. Ryan Frost, who runs our real estate development department, she's incredible. She's been doing it now for 7-8 years, has opened up hundreds of locations. So we want to have a 2 thumbs up too. We want to be able to look at the the franchisee in the eye, and we want them to be excited about it. We want to as well. Now, if the franchisee goes, I hate it, I don't like it, and you break, I fix is saying, Assurian is saying, well, we like it. We need buy-in on both sides. And we do support the franchisee. Most franchisors, by the way, that are, again, McDonald's is unique in the space, and there are some others that are maybe pretty similar to McDonald's, but most franchise systems will have a real estate team. They'll be collaborative. They'll work with you to identify the space, all that good stuff.
Kind of flip real quick. And again, this could be a very, very long answer. But flip this around, with you being, on the franchisee or franchisor side, I guess.
Right.
What are some of those things that you've learned, in going down that path? And just, anything come to mind, like these are the types of things you want to make sure that you have in place. You mentioned some of the things that you want to have a good attorney, and you want to, make sure that, the documents are not just off the shelf documents. Is there anything else that sort of comes to mind as, oh yeah, that was one of the things that we learned early on that, we should have done it a different way? Or there anything that sort of stands out that in that sense of, maybe something to look out for when you're looking to create your own franchise or start your own franchise?
Yeah, I think so. I think I would start with this. I've gone to a lot of franchise shows over the years, which, by the way, I think that is a great place to start. If you are looking to either start a franchise or invest in one, go look at what's out there. Go to and I know that it's uncomfortable now, the pandemic, and people are more introverted, in their home. But get out. If you feel comfortable, get out and go to a show. Franchisors are still attending shows. Turnouts are still a little bit low, but hopefully they continue to increase. If they don't, franchisors will end up not doing shows, and I think that's a bummer. I think it's super impactful to be able to talk to people that spearhead development, that are representing these brands, and ask them tough questions and meet them face to face. And I think that if you are starting your own, I think it's great to understand what the competitive landscape looks like. Who is out there? What is your business? Are there competitors that are actually going to these shows? Kind of interesting. When I first started back with You Break, I Fix, I got really aggressive about shows. I also love travel. I've flown a lot. I told you about my background. And clearly my old man loves to travel. So for me, getting on a plane and going to a random city and putting up a booth and talking to people, that's what I've done my whole life. So I started going to shows. And at the time I realized up until now, still our major competitor, they don't go to shows at all.
Wow.
So I was like, well, this is a huge advantage. And we've probably sold, between me and my team, I don't know, 30, 40 locations
Wow.
over the last 7 years from going to shows, that if we just said, hey, we're not going to go to them, like
Yeah.
we would have been missing out. Now, does it take work? Is it uncomfortable? Are you away from your family? Do you have to
Right.
stay in a
Right.
random hotel? Yeah. But, if you're cool with doing that, do it. So that would be advice. But back to what I was getting at, when you go to these shows, you'll see a lot of people that are starting that are local. Some are small local shows where, there's an Orlando show, there's a Miami show, a Tampa show, a Jacksonville show, and you'll have local people that are wanting to start a franchise, and they might have a successful business where they have proof of concept in Jacksonville, as an example.
Mm-hmm.
But the show comes to town and they talk to somebody and they're like, hey, we want to franchise it. Well, my biggest pet peeve is the guy or gal that has the sub franchise or has the ice cream franchise or has the whatever it is. I guess you could fill that in with any business. And they just started it, or they only have one unit.
Yeah.
They've never scaled it. They've never hired more than 5 employees. They have no handbook, no manual. They may or may not have an FDD. Usually they have to have an FDD, and they've started to think through that. But what you don't want to do is follow somebody where it's the blind leading the blind, where you're the guinea pig or the test dummy for the concept. Run for the hills. Don't do it. I do think there's advantages to being like early on in a company and being that pioneer. But keep in mind, the pioneer oftentimes gets the arrows in the back.
Yeah.
So, with franchising, I think being that there's a system in place, there's a recipe, and there's been a track record. And one of the, and by the way, like there's a lot of good brands out there. I think You Break, I Fix, Assurian, and I told you earlier, prior to jumping on, we actually are rebranding. Our company is going to be rebranding itself to Assurian Tech Repair and Solutions. And there's a lot of advantages. There's a lot of reasons why we're doing that through 2022. But, when You Break, I Fix was founded back in, 2008-9, we started with one. And then they quickly grew the business. So when we started franchising in 2013, we had 47 locations. We had a track record. So I like that. And I'm not saying you need 47, but just think about that. If you're jumping into something, make sure you're following somebody that has been where you want to go. Otherwise, you might not get the results you want. I would say that's the first thing. I would say one other thing really quickly, jump into a system that really get a sense of who the founders are or the owners are. One of the reasons why my mom has been a franchisee, my cousin still is, my brother still is, and some of my really close friends is because the founders of the company and the people, the leadership, best of the best, incredible human beings, super trustworthy. And I think it's really important to get to know them at a high level. And if you don't have a good sense of who they are as people, and by the way, like you're joining a huge company, you might not get that feeling. Like right now, today, you join Assurian, we're a great company, but it's a different scenario. But get to know the leadership, whether it's a founder-run company or it's a large company like Assurian. You want to know, hey, what is Assurian's plan for the company? Why did they acquire You Break, I Fix? What are some of the things that Assurian's done since they acquired the company? By the way, if you have interest, happy to go through all of those things with you. And I think it's a very compelling story and a great opportunity. But that's something you really, really want to get to know, because it is a marriage. It's a relationship. Franchising is a marriage. And I think that's important. And then I guess lastly, unit level economics have to make sense. If the unit level economics don't make sense when you're looking at the company, don't buy it thinking that they might in the future. They probably won't. Buy into something where the economics are favorable and they make sense, because at the end of the day, you're probably taking a huge step, and your family is probably reliant on this as a business, as an income. And then one other thing to think about too, and this is just kind of high level thought. Keep in mind, just because a franchise is a franchise doesn't mean that you couldn't acquire an existing business that's already operating. And you might say, one of the things that I've always been asked in the real estate background, that I have, that we talked about prior, and you've probably heard this a lot too with your background in real estate. Well, if it's such a good deal, well, why is it for sale?
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
I mean, job relocation, health issues, especially in the current environment that we're in. I know a lot of people that have been impacted, through the pandemic, with health related issues, divorce. There are so many different
Yeah. Life
reasons.
happens.
So don't ever get in that, state of mind where it's like you're overanalyzing, and it's almost like the fail mechanism is kicking in, where you're like, you start to think that way because you're like, oh, well, it's just too good to be true. And then you don't ever actually have to take that step, and it's kind of that safe box you're keeping yourself in. Don't get caught up in that. There are tons of opportunities in systems across the board where franchisors are going, hey, if we had a good operator, like we would sell our corporate door maybe. And by the way, I'm not saying us, Assurian, but I'm saying there are other systems out there that might have corporate doors that they bought from a franchisee that was not performing well. The corporation got it turned around, but that's not what they do long term, and they just want to sell it. And there's a revenue stream or an income for you to acquire. So that's another thing to just think about. If franchising is one of the paths that you're looking at.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I love all the advice and tips and all of that. This is a really, really packed full episode here. So I certainly appreciate that. If people want to learn more about you, or maybe they're interested in jumping into a new branded franchise, what would be the best way to reach out and get in touch or learn more?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So few different ways. So our franchising site is still, we're actually in the process of updating and rebranding everything, but you can go to our website, which is as of today, ubreakifix.com. And it's, spelled ubreakifix.com, not YOU, but the letter U. And then you click on franchising, you can fill out your information, submit a request. Me or one of my team members would love to chat with you. If you want to directly connect with me, you want to speak with me, want to chat about something, not related to what we talked about today, I'm happy to, feel free to b.smith at ubreakifix.com is my email address. Feel free to reach out, and I'd love to chat.
Excellent. Brynson, this has been fantastic. Again, many, many thanks, and look forward to seeing what you guys do next.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it. And thank you.